Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to carry a future that hasn't arrived yet? To lie awake at night, running through conversations that never happened, preparing for disasters that exist only in the theater of your own mind, bracing your body against outcomes you cannot see and cannot touch. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with how many hours you slept or how hard you worked. It lives deeper than that. It settles into the shoulders before you even open your eyes in the morning. It tightens the jaw before the first word of the day is spoken. It is the tiredness of a mind that has been on duty for years, scanning, calculating, predicting, gripping, convinced that if it just thinks hard enough, long enough, carefully enough, it can finally make life safe. And maybe you have told yourself the same quiet lie that so many people tell themselves. That worry is a form of preparation. That if you rehearse the worst often enough, it will hurt less when it comes. That staying alert, staying ready, staying one step ahead is simply what responsible people do. No one ever taught you to question that. The culture around you rewarded it. Being anxious was confused with being serious. Being controlling was confused with being capable. And so the grip tightened year after year, until the gripping itself became the suffering. Not the thing you were afraid of, but the relentless act of holding on. If any of this feels familiar, not as a diagnosis, but as a recognition, a quiet yes somewhere in your chest, then what follows is for you. Not a set of instructions to follow perfectly, not another standard to measure yourself against. Just a conversation, one that has been waiting for you for a long time. If you feel called to stay close to reflections like this one, to return here when the mind grows loud and the breath grows shallow, consider subscribing, because there is more of this waiting for you, and you deserve a place that speaks to the part of you that already knows how to be still. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to become someone different. It does not promise that if you meditate long enough or think correctly enough, life will stop being uncertain. Life will always be uncertain. That is not a flaw in the design. That is the design. What changes, what can change slowly, gently, without force, is your relationship to that uncertainty. Instead of fighting the river, you learn to flow. Instead of demanding that the weather obey you, you learn to dress for what comes. This is not passivity. This is not giving up. This is something far more courageous than control ever was. This is presence. And presence, it turns out, is the only place where peace has ever actually lived. Begin with something that most people never examine honestly: the nature of worry itself. When worry arises, it feels productive. It feels like action. The mind presents it as problem solving, as if by imagining every possible way something could go wrong, you are somehow protecting yourself from those outcomes. But look more closely, gently, without judgment, and something different reveals itself. Worry is not problem solving. Worry is the body bracing. Before the mind has even formed a coherent thought, the jaw has tightened, the shoulders have risen, the stomach has contracted, the breath has become small and shallow. This is not planning. This is a nervous system that has learned to treat uncertainty as danger and is responding accordingly, flooding the body with tension before anything has actually happened. The Buddha taught that suffering does not come from the circumstances of life. It comes from our relationship to those circumstances. And nowhere is this more visible than in the phenomenon of worry, because the thing you are suffering from in those long, grinding moments of anxiety is not real. It is a story, a projection, a film that the mind is running on a loop, starring a future that has not arrived and may never arrive in the form you are imagining. Research consistently shows that the vast majority of the things people worry about either never happen at all or happen so differently from what was imagined that the rehearsal was useless anyway. You suffered twice, once in imagination and once perhaps in reality. And the suffering in imagination was always longer. So the first shift is not about stopping worry. Trying to stop worry by force is like trying to still a lake by pressing your hands against the water. The effort creates more turbulence, not less. The shift is something quieter. It is learning to ask a different question when anxiety rises. Not how do I fix this? Not what if this goes wrong, but simply what am I trying to control right now? Name it. Bring it into the light. You may find that what you are trying to control is another person's opinion of you, or the outcome of a situation that depends on 100 variables you cannot see, or the future itself, vast, unmappable, moving according to its own laws. And when you name it honestly, something loosens, not because the uncertainty disappears, but because you have stopped pretending you were ever in charge of it. There is a practice as simple as breathing itself. The next time you feel that familiar tightening, pause, not to fix, not to analyze, just to notice. Feel where the tension lives in your body. Name it without judgment. And then ask, is this real right now, in this moment? Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now, in this room, with this breath, is there an actual emergency? More often than not, the answer is no, and that no, however small, creates just enough space for the breath to deepen. That is where it begins, not in grand transformation, in one honest breath. The second thing worth understanding, and this one runs quietly against everything the world has told you, is that letting go is not the same as losing. When most people hear the phrase, let go, something inside them resists, because letting go has been associated with defeat, with weakness, with not caring enough. If I stop gripping this, the thinking goes, it will slip away. If I stop worrying about the people I love, something terrible will happen to them. If I stop holding this plan tightly, it will fall apart. And so the grip tightens further, not out of strength, but out of fear, dressed up as love. Imagine holding a handful of sand. When your hand is open and relaxed, the sand rests quietly in your palm, held effortlessly by nothing more than stillness. But the moment you close your fist, the moment you squeeze, convinced the tightness is the same as security, the sand begins to slip between your fingers faster than you can stop it. Life moves the same way. The tighter you hold, the faster things escape you. The more desperately you grip the present moment, the less of it you actually experience. Letting go, in the Buddhist sense, is not an act of abandonment. It is an act of trust. It is the decision to observe your thoughts as weather, as passing clouds in a sky that remains unchanged, rather than climbing inside each cloud and demanding it explain itself. A worried thought is not a prophecy. A fearful thought is not a fact. It is mental activity, nothing more. When you can look at a thought and say quietly, there is thinking happening without fusing yourself to it, without making it the ground you stand on, something remarkable occurs. The thought loses its authority over you. It passes, and you remain. The sky, your awareness itself, was never threatened. You simply forgot for a moment that you were the sky and not the storm. There is a practical form of this that you can begin today when a thought arrives that says, this will go wrong, or they will leave, or I cannot handle what is coming. Instead of arguing with it and instead of trying to disprove it or suppress it, try simply noting it. Say to yourself, quietly, without drama, there is a worried thought. Not my worried thought, not the truth. Just a thought. Then return to something real. The feeling of your feet on the floor. The temperature of the air against your skin. The slow, unforced rhythm of your breath entering and leaving. These sensations are anchors. They exist only now. They cannot exist in yesterday or tomorrow. And now, right now, is almost always manageable. The third understanding touches something that runs even deeper: the difference between effort and force. Modern culture has collapsed these two things into one. Working hard, pushing through, never quitting, these are treated as the same as wisdom and strength, but they are not. Force is tension pretending to be power. Force is the feeling of gripping the steering wheel so hard that your hands ache, convinced that your grip is what is keeping the car on the road. Effort, true effort, the kind the Buddha described as right effort, is something entirely different. It is calm and clear. It knows when to act and when to wait. It does not exhaust itself fighting what cannot be moved. Think of a river. A river does not stop flowing because a rock appears in its path. It does not panic, does not force itself through the obstruction, does not spin in anxious circles, trying to calculate all possible outcomes. It flows around the rock, or it waits, quietly, patiently, until the path reveals itself. And the river is never weakened by this. It arrives at the sea just the same. There is a kind of clarity that is only available in stillness, not in the noise of overthinking, not in the frantic rehearsal of every possible scenario, but in the quiet that appears when you stop forcing. In that quiet, solutions arise on their own. The next right step becomes visible, not because you thought harder, but because you finally stopped thinking long enough to see. This is an invitation to examine the quality of your effort, not how much you do, but the texture of how you do it. When you are acting from fear, from the desperate need for a specific outcome, the body knows. The jaw tightens, the chest constricts. The actions you take are edged with a brittleness that can feel, from the inside, like determination, but that exhausts you far faster than real work ever does. And when you act from clarity, from genuine presence, from the willingness to do your best, and then release the result, the body knows that too. The breath is steadier. The actions are sharper. There is a kind of ease available even in difficulty, because you are no longer fighting two battles at once, the one in front of you and the one inside your own mind. A small practice for this: before beginning anything today, a difficult conversation, a demanding task, a moment of uncertainty, pause for just a few seconds. Feel the quality of energy you are bringing. Is it tight? Is it driven by the need for a specific outcome? If so, breathe once, not to erase the difficulty, not to pretend the stakes aren't real, just to loosen the grip enough that your actions can come from presence rather than panic. That single breath changes the quality of everything that follows. The fourth understanding is perhaps the most quietly radical of all, because it asks you to reconsider something that feels completely natural: your resistance to what is happening. When life presents something difficult, a plan that falls apart, a relationship that shifts, a season of loss or uncertainty, the first response, almost universally, is resistance. This shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. I need this to be different. And layered on top of the actual difficulty, which is real and which deserves compassion, is this second layer of suffering, the resistance itself, the fight against the fact. And it is this second layer, not the first, that makes the weight unbearable. Buddhist teaching draws a careful and important distinction here. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Not optional in a dismissive way, not in the way someone might coldly tell you to just get over it. Optional in the sense that the additional suffering created by resisting what is already here is something you have the power to put down. When you stop adding the story, this shouldn't be happening, to the reality of what is already happening, the load immediately becomes lighter. not lighter. The situation has not changed, but you have stopped fighting it with half your remaining energy, which means that energy is now available for grief, for response, for adaptation, for the slow, honest work of moving through what is real. Acceptance is not approval. This is worth saying plainly, because the word acceptance is often misunderstood. Accepting what is does not mean agreeing that it is good. It does not mean pretending it doesn't hurt. It means stopping the internal war against reality, the war that reality always wins, but not before exhausting you completely. A tree in a storm does not argue with the wind. It bends, fully, sometimes dramatically, but its roots hold, and when the storm passes, it is still standing. You can grieve what is lost and still stop fighting the fact that it is gone. You can acknowledge pain fully and still release the need for reality to have been different. These are not contradictions. They are the texture of a life lived honestly. Impermanence, the truth that everything changes, that nothing stays exactly as it is the ground beneath all of this. Everything you are feeling right now is temporary, including the heaviness, including the fear, not because feelings are unimportant, but because they are alive, and everything alive moves. When you resist a feeling, when you tell it, it should not be here, you press it flat against the floor of your experience. You hold it in place. It cannot move through you, because you will not let it be what it is. But when you allow it, when you turn toward it with the same gentle curiosity you might bring to a cloud passing overhead, it begins on its own to shift. This is not suppression. It is not toxic positivity. It is the simple, ancient discovery that what we welcome, we can release. Now consider one of the quietest traps of the anxious mind, the belief that trust means certainty, that before you can relax, before you can release control, you need to know that things will turn out well. But genuine trust, the kind the Buddha pointed toward, has nothing to do with predicting outcomes. It is something more fundamental. It is the quiet knowing that whatever arrives, you will be able to meet it. Not because you have prepared for every possibility, not because you have worried enough to have covered every angle, but because you have, moment by moment, practiced being present. And presence is the only equipment you ever actually needed. If you find yourself returning to these reflections often, if you feel in them something that mirrors what is quietest and truest in you, consider subscribing. There is a place here that will keep this conversation going, gently, as long as you need it. The fifth understanding sits at the heart of everything, the difference between passivity and flow. Letting go of control is not the same as lying down and waiting for life to happen to you. This is the misunderstanding that most often stops people at the threshold. They think, if I stop gripping, if I stop forcing, if I release my need for specific outcomes, then nothing will happen. Then I will drift. Then everything I have worked for will dissolve. But this is the fear speaking, not the truth. The river does not stop moving when it stops fighting the rocks. It moves better. It moves truer. It moves with the full force of what it actually is, unimpeded by the friction of resistance. Acting from clarity is different from acting from fear in a way that is felt before it is understood. When you act from fear, the question underneath every decision is, will this keep something bad from happening? When you act from clarity, the question is different. What is the wisest response to what is actually here right now? The first question is about the future. The second is about the present. And the present is the only place where you have any actual power to act. The stress that comes from action, and sometimes the work is genuinely hard, genuinely tiring, is qualitatively different from the stress of attachment to outcome. You can work with full intensity and full commitment and still hold the result loosely. You can care deeply about what you are doing and still release the need for it to turn out precisely as you imagined. This is not indifference. This is freedom in the middle of action. There is a Zen story, not told to be clever, but because it has been useful for centuries, of a farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbor said, "What terrible luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." The next day the horse returned and brought 3 wild horses with it. The neighbor said, "What wonderful luck." The farmer said, "Maybe." The following week his son broke his leg trying to tame one of the wild horses. The neighbors said, "What a tragedy." The farmer said, "Maybe." Shortly after, soldiers came through conscripting young men for war. His son, because of his broken leg, was passed over. The neighbors said, "How fortunate." The farmer said, "Maybe." The lesson here is not detachment. It is not indifference. It is humility before the complexity of what life actually is. A sequence of events whose meaning cannot be fully grasped in the moment they occur. Control assumes you know how things should go. Wisdom allows mystery. A practice for this: when you notice the mind attaching desperately to a specific outcome, when you catch yourself thinking, "I will only be okay if this happens," pause. Name it. Say to yourself, "I am attached to this outcome," and then ask, "What is my best action right now, regardless of what the outcome will be?" Do that. And then, gently, repeatedly if necessary, let the result go where it goes. This is not done perfectly. It is done imperfectly, again and again, like returning to the breath in meditation. The returning is the practice. The 6th and final understanding closes the circle of everything that came before. Much of the unhappiness that people carry, and carry quietly without fully realizing the weight, comes from a set of invisible conditions they have placed on their own peace. I will be okay when this is resolved. I will relax when things feel more stable. I will be happy when my life looks more like what I imagined. And because life is inherently unpredictable, because it will never stay in the exact shape you arranged it, the conditions are almost never fully met. And so the peace keeps getting postponed. And the life that is actually here, this ordinary, imperfect, irreplaceable Tuesday afternoon, passes through your hands unseen, because the mind is somewhere else negotiating with a version of reality that does not exist. Stopping the argument with life is not a grand act. It is not a decision made once and held forever. It is a practice of noticing moment by moment without drama when the mind has slipped into that posture of "this should be different," and gently, without self-judgment, returning to what is actually here. When you are present to your actual life instead of your imagined better life, something surprising happens to the quality of ordinary experience. The coffee in your hand is actually warm. The light through the window is actually beautiful. The person in front of you is actually interesting, not because any of these things changed, but because you arrived. You stopped being somewhere else and you came here into the only moment that has ever held anything real. And something else happens too, perhaps unexpectedly. Compassion grows. When you understand, in your body, not just in your head, that everyone around you is also living inside their own uncertainty, is also managing their own fear and their own grip and their own privately carried conditions for peace, the judgment softens. The harshness you might have felt toward people who frustrated you begins to ease. You recognize the anxiety underneath the difficult behavior. You recognize it because you know it. And in that recognition, connection becomes possible in a way that control never allowed. These are not rules. They were never meant to be rules. A rule can be followed perfectly and still leave the heart empty. These are invitations, quiet, unhurried, offered without pressure, to try a different relationship with the one life you have, to worry a little less about managing it and a little more about inhabiting it, to grip a little less and feel a little more, to stop rehearsing the future long enough to notice what is actually here, right now, asking to be seen. You do not need to get this right. You do not need to master acceptance or achieve stillness or arrive at some permanent state of peace that never wavers. The wavering is part of it. The returning is the whole point. Every time you notice you have gripped again and you breathe and you soften, that is the practice. That is enough. That has always been enough. May your mind grow quieter with each passing day. May your shoulders find their way down. May you discover again and again that the present moment was never something to survive. It was always and only your life. If these words have offered you even a small space to breathe, stay close, subscribe, and let this be a place you return to whenever the grip tightens and you need reminding that you already know how to let go.